Welcome to the Rebuilding Arizona Civics podcast. This podcast aims to share our journey of sustaining Arizona's interest in reforms to civic education by implementing the Educating for American Democracy roadmap. This work is being done by an amazing group of Arizona civic teacher leaders and overseen by the Center for Political Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. I'm your host, Liz Evans, Director of Civic Education at Arizona State University, and I'll be interviewing Arizona teachers and thought leaders in civic education. We hope you enjoy our journey to make Arizona a national civics renewal model. And welcome back to part 2 of our podcast. We're looking at the 7 themes that are listed in the EAD. If you haven't listened to part 1, please do so. Our task force chairs, Tara, Tammy, and Jeremy, go through and talk about the first 3 themes. So on this episode, we're going to be talking about the next 4 themes. So we're just going to jump right in. Theme number 4 explores a new government and constitution. How can we use this theme to take history and civics out of the past and make it relevant to today?
Hi, everyone. Glad to be back for our part 2 of the 7 themes. Tara Bartlett here, and looking specifically at this theme around the new government and the Constitution, but through this lens of, present day. It's really looking at what we always say the Constitution is, right? Like, it's a living document. It's forever changing and adapting dependent on what our current, country needs might be. And so this theme really, I think, positions students to push back and look at a lot of the, amendments and policies that have been enacted and question, are these what our country needs today? Is this really best serving the different constituents across the U.S.? And also looking at the different processes in terms of how flexible or adaptable these policies and amendments might be. And then beyond the Constitution itself, also political institutions. And so really looking at how our country has come to create, this kind of multi-layered approach into institutionalizing government. And so I think that really brings in an opportunity for students to look, again, both at their local level, all the way up to the federal level in terms of our constitutional democracy.
Hi, it's Tammy. I'm so glad to be back. One of the things that I really think about when I think about this theme is this idea that we are continuously having this similar debates. We think about the Constitutional Convention and these debates over compromise, what is equality, who should participate. And we can take these ideas and these themes, and they're still being debated and part of what we do in contemporary America. For example, this idea of we have our founding document, we have our Declaration of Independence, and it talks about this idea that all mankind is created equal. And we can look at that idea of equality from, pre-Constitution ratification through different times in our history. And we can look at to what extent do we achieve what I think of as the promise of the Declaration of Independence. So we're still having these debates today, looking at relationships between the balance of liberty and equality. We're looking at the idea of power and rights and our rights absolute. Our Constitution is continuously being interpreted by the Supreme Court, which meets each year, and we have an amendment process which has expanded and changed that Constitution. So it gives you a really great set of ideas and controversies and principles to look at current issues through as a lens. And really that idea of creating that more perfect union. And how are we creating that more perfect union, and who's that union more perfect for. So I think that a lot of times people look at this theme and they say, oh yeah, this is the Constitution, this is the Bill of Rights, this is our country's early beginnings. But I really do see it as completely part of our present. And you have to understand that past and those debates and that ratification process in order to really understand where we are today and what are the same issues that we're talking about today that we can really see reflected in those Federalist, anti-Federalist debates.
Well, Tammy, you stole a little bit of my thunder, and that doesn't make me sad because I agree with what you just said. But yeah, I'll elaborate or expand on that a little bit. I think, and again, I'm sitting here looking at the various guiding questions and driving questions by grade level and the key concepts. I think that if you as a teacher sit down and look through this, you will recognize that no, the writing of the Constitution, the debate over its ratification, and the addition of the Bill of Rights, and then maybe you could vault forward and add the Reconstruction amendments to it as well. That's not something that happened in history and was done. Those things are representative, all of them in some way or another are representative of ongoing, as I call them, like baked in debates. They're just part of the American political culture. I mean, the whole idea of how do you have majority rule but protect the minority, a numerical minority? Because you can't have pure democracy and always have majority rule and also protect a numerical minority. Like that is something we have never resolved. The powdered wig ancestors of ours, the bearded Gilded Age folks, none of those people resolved it. The progressives couldn't figure it out, and we haven't figured it out yet. I actually find a tremendous amount of connectivity and continuity with Americans throughout our history looking at these questions, because these are the same issues that our grandparents and great-grandparents and on back dealt with, and we still deal with them. So the idea of making these things relevant to students, I think when you look at them from this perspective, the relevance is obvious. That these are just things that are part of our funky experiment in Republican self-government, little r, remember that, that we just can't get around. And every generation has to wrestle with these things.
The good answer to the question that students ask, when am I ever going to use this? And the answer is all the time. Thank you for that. So our next theme, institutional and social transformation. Why is change worth exploring?
Change is worth exploring for so many different reasons. I love this theme. You're probably going to hear me say I love all the themes because I really do. I see something important that connects to me in each one of them. And I think students will see something that connects to them in each one. I think change is important because without change, you have stagnation and you don't move forward, you don't grow. And one of the things that we think about in terms of when students say, I don't want to learn about history, it's the past, it has nothing to do with the present. Well, change is a big factor, which shows why it's so applicable to the present. One of the things that I really like is the subtitle of this theme is a series of refoundings. And I think it's fascinating to think about the fact of looking at the question of when was the United States, when was the founding? And did we just have one founding? Or every time we make major political, social, and economic transformations, are we refounding our country again and creating something new? And I think that this is an important idea for students to look at because it really is the essence of political philosophy and ideas on one hand, but on the other hand, it also looks at how change and transformation in our political and civic structures have also happened. Like, how do you change the Constitution? How do voting rights work? How have we changed from the original only white male landowners can vote to basically universal suffrage right now? And how did politics and economics and social movements, which are very interesting to students, how did those lead to some of these changes? So I think change is very important. It keeps us It keeps our country relevant and strong in leadership when we continuously have change happening, but not just for change's sake, but moving forward towards those founding goals. And I always go back to that Declaration of Independence and see that as kind of that blueprint for what we see as the highest achievement we can have.
I think this provides also an opportunity to examine, I mean, change is neither good nor bad. I mean, I guess you could say change is inevitable. I mean, we would love to think that we can just, establish something and that's the way it's going to be from here forward. That's just not part of the human experience. But I think that this theme and the questions and the pieces and parts to it, I think opens the door to the possibility of a good discussion of, okay, how do we manage change as a self-governing people, and what things do we look at? And, Tammy, you go back to the Declaration, and that's something that Lincoln went back to again and again and again. If we look back to that and say, okay, if that's a measuring stick, is there change that needs to happen in order to better achieve that? And also, are there things that we ought not change? Because I think that sometimes change gets a pass, like the idea, well, we're changing things. Like, well, what are you changing? And to what end? So I think this is bigger than just, hey, it's change. It's how do we manage that? Because it's inevitable. But how does the system we have seek to facilitate change, and how do we as a people manage it and choose what to change and what not to change? And then beyond that, at what level? We talk about this funky federal system of ours. But yeah, I think that this presents that as a more comprehensive and detailed topic.
Thanks for that emphasis, Jeremy, on change, because I think that really is, my focus of the response that I have to this theme is this idea of change. And to Jeremy's point, to whose benefit that this change is going to be taking place. And I think kind of an underlying sub-theme to this overall theme is the idea of justice. And so analyzing, laws and policies and social structures in terms of change, and how in history, the different roles that people have played in enacting on change, but then also institutional and outside of institutions, the changes that occur there. And so something that I think students, automatically, kind of drive home to is this idea of justice. And I think we've all had students in our classroom, the fairness and the kind of moral compass that they bring into classes, that this theme speaks to that. And looking in history, what has served as a just change versus changes that have not been so just, and looking forward, what changes need to happen in our current society in order for justice to be served. And so I think within this theme itself, a lot of students will find different concepts. It could, be voting acts that we're seeing pop up across the country in terms of voter suppression bills. It could be, equity within education. And so there's a lot of present day examples that we can tie to this theme in terms of justice and looking at it in that historical context.
So we've talked a lot in our themes about American civics and American government, but our next theme really explores the United States in a global context. So my next question is, why is it important to explore the US in a global context?
This may sound cheap, but we don't have a choice. Really, we as Americans, for a number of reasons, do not have a choice to be ignorant about the world beyond our borders, because we interact with it economically, politically, culturally, socially, we do these things whether people know about them or not, and they impact our lives, whether we understand them or not. And because our political leaders, elected political leaders, and many unelected, appointees and professional civil servants, like in the State Department, make decisions that have material impacts on our lives. When we go to elect a senator, or we're electing someone who is going to have a say over ambassadors that a president is going to choose. Now, obviously, there are layers that separate us from that decision, but our vote plays a role in that. And this is where this is where like self-government and American republicanism, it's a pain. Like, it would be so much easier if we just had a pharaoh who would tell us which way is up and what shoes to wear and all that kind of stuff. It'd be so much easier because we, the people, would be able to just bask in our ignorance. We wouldn't have to know anything, but we have to understand like all this supply chain stuff that's going on right now. You know, people, they blame elected leaders, or they don't, or they selectively blame elected leaders. But how many students truly understand, like, how does this actually work? And how do private companies and our trade agreements and these things interact? And how has this caused this situation that we're all experiencing right now? So, I mean, I'm not going to take a shot at like, I don't know, Monte Carlo. But like, if you're a citizen of Monte Carlo, like the threshold for knowing about global events is probably, maybe I'm dead wrong, but it seems to me to be a lot lower. Like Liechtenstein, you're just the United States. We just don't have a choice. And if you want to be an informed actor, you have to understand certain things. And so understanding how we as a country, politically and legally and also economically and socially fit in the world and interact with the world. That's an essential piece to playing an informed role as a voter, really.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I don't think, Jeremy, that it is an oversimplification to say that we obviously don't have a choice. I think now, instead of just in terms of U.S. citizenship, and again, that could be big C for the naturalized citizen or small c in terms of being, a member of your communities and different communities of practice here in the U.S., is that we're moving away from just that U.S.-centric version of citizenship to this idea of global citizenship, because you're right, we in our existence are transcending these, essentially man-made borders in terms of political implications, social connections, the environment. I mean, climate change is a huge talking point right now in terms of this connection to other countries. And so I think that we're cornered into, we don't have a choice, but at the same time, that is something exciting within this theme for students to explore. And again, you have the litany of different historical events that you can draw from. But forward thinking, this is really, I think, in terms of our best interest, in terms of, national interest, safety here within the U.S., human rights, and again, those ideas of justice that we should be paying attention and versed in this idea of globalization. And so this theme, I think, really speaks to that on every level.
Karen, Jeremy, you guys brought up such great points. The one thing that I kind of think about is this idea that we are a global power. The United States is a global power, and we can debate and discuss the implications of that and how we use that power, but it's a fact. So when I look at this idea of people in the world, because we're a global power, because we've taken on a lot of global leadership, we have to be stewards of that role. And students have to understand that we have an interdependent world now. I mean, look at this little virus that started way over in another part of the world and how it's impacting us here, and it's impacting our borders, our trade, our policies, and things like that. So we can't like put our head in the sand and be the isolationists of the pre-World War I time period. So we really look at influence, how we can cooperate, how we can work to solve conflicts. Sometimes we have conflicts that we're center stage with, but students have to understand all of that and how that fits, not just historically, but how does our governmental system and structure deal with foreign policy? How do we make our decisions? How does separation of powers and checks and balances work when it comes to peacemaking and war making and those types of things? And then the last thing I just want to say is I think back to this idea too that we've always been a global power, even when we said we weren't a global power, because we created this document, this Declaration of Independence. We were the first colonial group to break free from our colonizers. We set the stage for revolutions historically and modern across the world. Our Declaration of Independence has its spirit in so many of the declarations that other countries have had. The Declaration of Independence that Haiti had, the Declarations of Independence that the French had for the French Revolution, Latin American countries. We see that also within our own country with the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments and things like that. So we have always, from the moment we had revolution in our country, from the moment we penned the Declaration of Independence, we have always been a country of the world and a people of the world. And I think that this theme also just really ties so well to modern American history, world history, current events. And many times students don't get that. We run out of time when we're teaching it, or, get to World War II, and then you're like, we only have 2 weeks to finish the rest of US history. But this theme can really draw from that past and really bring it to the present for students. And I really love the way these questions and examples in this theme bring that to fruition.
And that is wonderful segue to our last theme, which you're not supposed to have favorites, but this is my favorite theme. Our last theme that we're going to talk about are contemporary debates and possibilities. And I love that it says and possibilities. So political arguments have long been a part of American government and history. How does knowledge of the past help us think about political and economic debates today?
This isn't necessarily my favorite theme. I don't think I also just have one favorite theme, but I do think that this theme really blends all the other themes and is kind of like this, end point of where students today can really start looking forward to enact change. So I think, we're all acutely aware of what is being said in terms of, is democracy in peril? Is this a post-democracy world that we're living in now? And I think that within this theme, this gives students the space to kind of explore that rhetoric and possibly push back, problem solve, create some, solution-oriented thinking around all the issues that we are facing today in terms of democracy. And so I think that this theme gives space for that reflection and knowledge of the American past. So kind of, reflecting on what the other themes have brought in terms of, the Constitution or the foundings and the refoundings and different social movements and events. But now, in reflection of those past events, what is it that has worked? What debates or perspectives can we carry through to better serve where we're headed or want to head today? And kind of looking at these different narratives throughout history and then the relationships between these different perspectives. And one thing that this theme, I think, does a really nice job of doing is positioning questions for students to have those healthy debates within their classroom. I know several of the earlier themes spoke to that, but this really, I think, again, drives home all the other themes and allows students to explore and build strategies to have these conversations in that forward-thinking manner.
What I really love about this theme is that it is a theme of optimism to me. It is a theme that says, look, historically, we've had times where we thought our republic was going to end. We've had civil war. We've had pandemics, and we have had movements that have denied people their rights. But we have then looked at the possibilities, and we have moved forward in many of those ways. So to me, it's very optimistic theme. And I think optimism is really important when we teach civics and American history to our students, because sometimes students can see so much of the past that can be troubling, or denial of rights, and you can be almost frozen in what you see your role as a citizen to be. And I think that this theme allows us agency, students, agency. You matter, you can make a difference in the world. And let's look historically at people who have made a difference in the world and what they've done and how they've made a difference in their country. And the other part of this theme I really like is this idea of debates, because a lot of times we look at the word debate and people look at it as antagonistic. But part of moving forward as a country is to have different viewpoints, to discuss those viewpoints, to come together in that civil dialogue, and many times not agree with what's happening, but at times come to compromise. And I'm reminded of this theme by something I heard. Somebody was talking about how we argue too much as Americans. We argue too much. It's bad. And then the speaker I was listening to said, it's not that we need less arguments in the United States. We need better arguments in the United States. We need to learn how to have that civic friendship, that idea of compromise to create that more perfect union, that better world. So I love this theme because of the relevance to students. I love this theme because it prepares them for citizenship. I love this theme also because it allows us to look at our past and to look at what worked, but also what didn't work, to help us formulate a new path or stay on a current path depending on the issue. And I think it's a really great way maybe to break through some of the political polarization.
I think too, it brings things full circle. I mean, if we start off with theme one, where we're talking about civic participation, well, more than likely we are going to, if each of us is going to be a civically active, we're going to be engaging in debates, and those debates open up possibilities. And one of the things that I see when I look through the 4 grade bands and I look at some of the guiding questions, I also see, and then this goes off what both of you just said about, looking back and saying, hey, what worked and what didn't work. There's a degree of, I see, implied humility that, look, there are things that we tried in the past that didn't work. And there are things that we tried in the past that did. And reinventing the wheel is dumb. And doing the same thing over again and expecting different results is equally dumb. And so asking students to look back and say, hey, listen, let's take them for who they were and let's extract what can we get out of these folks, our ancestors. And so there's that humility to stop and think and not just assume, well, since we're now in 2022, we know better. Or since there are statues of them, they must know better. In some cases, it's one or the other. In some cases, it's neither. But this gives us an opportunity to have a discussion and think through it instead of just run to our corners, or rather train the next generation of citizens who are currently students to run to their corner. We don't want that.
That is fantastic. So we've gone through all 7 themes in part 1 and now today in part 2. So my last question for the 3 of you: what is one key takeaway that you want educators, or really anybody in the civic education space, to consider as they explore the 7 themes?
I'll go ahead and start with this one. So one key takeaway I want educators to consider as they explore these themes is that they don't have to do all the themes every single time, that you can start with something, 1 or 2 themes that really apply to maybe a unit that you're doing or your semester. And then each time you teach your content, think about ways that you can bring in more of the themes. But it's not you have to do every single one of the 7 themes and have to do them, if you do choose to do them, with the same amount of emphasis. They're very flexible.
I agree with that completely. And I think that people could burden themselves by assuming, well, I need to do all of this at once. Like, oh my goodness, I need to have a checklist on my lesson. I need to check off every single one of these. And it's just not going to work that way. I think something that I have recommended to people, and I recommend here, is as you consider this roadmap and the Educating for American Democracy project, I encourage you to take the time to read through the themes in full. Don't try to do it all at once. Don't try to just swallow it all at once. What I would do personally is I would look at the themes. It doesn't really matter what order you read through them in, but I would go ahead and read the short description. I would read the overarching thematic questions, and then I would go to your grade band and I would read all the information for your grade band. And then just depending on your interest, either go, to another grade band and either up or down, whatever. But I would take the time to commit to reading through these 7 themes in full, because I think that's where you'll be able to appreciate them, and you'll be able to understand not only what they are, but what they're seeking to accomplish. And I think the most important thing with this whole EAD project is understanding what it is, what it seeks to accomplish, and how it seeks to do that. I think if you nail that down first, everything else will come naturally from it. Whereas if you're just like, okay, I'm going to read this really quickly and I'm going to move to the next thing, and if you treat it as like something you're just going to like grab and read a little bit of, you won't get it. So it's not a lot of reading. It's not that long. I think it's well organized. So if you were just to set aside time on a few occasions after listening to these episodes, I think that you could sink that time in, and this will make a lot of sense to you. And I think it'll inspire you in a lot of ways to re-examine your own lessons and units and instruction.
Yeah, those are really great pieces of advice, Tammy and Jeremy. And to build off that, and I know, Jeremy, you shared the website earlier in a podcast, but the website educatingforamericandemocracy.org. If you go to that website and you go to that 7 themes section, it is set up very nicely, very easy to navigate those 7 themes in terms of concepts, but then also by grade band. And if you actually scroll down and you look at those questions that are posed within both the history section and the civic section, there's hyperlinks to resources in terms of, civic lessons that you can implement with your students, primary source documents to use to support those questions. So just know that although this framework, it's broad, you as the teacher have so much freedom in terms of choice on how to link this roadmap to the different pieces of curriculum and standards that you are teaching within your classroom and at your grade band. And so just approaching this with a very open mindset in terms of how can I cater this to my students in terms of the grade level, the population, their civic readiness, and taking that as, the expert in the room, the teacher, you, and presenting this in a manner that is easily digestible for your students. There's a lot of help and support. And I know that as part of the cohort that is going through and listening to these podcasts, you also will have each other to discuss and kind of tease out some of these questions within the roadmap itself. So just know that you have a lot of support already baked in your exploration of this roadmap.
Thank you for bringing that up, Tara. We will link it in show notes, as always. There are a lot of lesson plans on here that you could pick by grade band, by theme. I think it's worth exploring because you'll notice a lot of civic educators as they're going through this. They already do a lot of these things, and the EAD is a little bit more support to help you get a little deeper and to really tie a lot of these themes in. So thank you again, the 3 of you. I am excited because our next episode will be on primary sources, which every social studies teacher loves so much. So thank you again, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening. You can find the Center for Political Thought and Leadership on social media channels. Please subscribe to our podcast wherever you find your favorite podcast. And on a last note, the views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not necessarily represent the Center for Political Thought and Leadership or Arizona State University.